Hello everybody and welcome to Double G Studios. What the heck is this? So, spoiler alert, I'm going to tell you what it is. This is a fiber optic cable splice. This is a fiber optic cable splice circa 1986. I built this in 1986 on a line that was laid from Peoria north to just south of I-80. Part of the very first across the state of Illinois long-distance fiber optic cable network. This was in the very, very early days of fiber optics. So anyway, that is what this is. Taking it apart might be kind of boring, but I'm going to do it and show you what's in here. But first, before I do that, I'm going to give you a little slideshow to provide some context as to not only what this is, but why is it in my possession and how did it come to be in my possession. So stay tuned and I will tell you the story via some slides. Alright, so this story is going to start in 1984, even though I built a particular splice in 1986. But in 1984 was when I was first introduced to fiber optics. I was one of the very first cable splicing technicians in the state of Illinois chosen to go to Norcross, Georgia, to where AT&T's manufacturing facilities were for manufacturing fiber cables back then. Fiber optics was very new, having just been introduced to telecommunications maybe just a year or two prior to 1984. But it was in 1984 when the development of single mode fiber really took hold and started to really expand in the telecommunications world. I was fortunate to be one of the very first technicians trained on how to work with it, and I was sent to Norcross, Georgia to be taught how to splice fibers together, because when you place cable at some point you need to take two ends of the cables that you're placing and splice them together to make the cables longer, which is of course the job of a cable splicing technician. Take two cable ends, splice them together. So anyway, my first introduction to fiber optics was in 1984, where I was taught the bonded method for splicing fiber, which was a method of gluing fibers together. The method of welding them together, or fusion, was around, but it didn't work well for single mode fibers at the time. So in 1984, we were gluing them. And also in 1984 was the first year that Illinois Bell Telephone held what was referred to as a fiber optic showcase, sort of a trade show for fiber optic vendors from across the country to show their wares to telephone companies, who would then fly people in to view all the exhibits. And it was a very big deal. The first trade show of its kind, really, I think, back then in 1984. And that's where I'm going to start with this story. So let's go look at my slides and take me out of the picture. So this is the only color picture in these slides. And before I even begin, let me say this. The fact that I have any pictures of me at all from 1986 is rather amazing, 1984 through 1986, because back then there were no cell phones and people didn't carry cameras with them everywhere they went. And finding any pictures of me from the 80s, 70s, 60s, almost impossible. But the reason I do have these pictures of me from 1984, 5, and 6 are these pictures were sent to me from the photographic department at Illinois Bell by a photographer who was retiring. And when he was retiring, he was going through his files, and he rounded up pictures of people who were still working at the company. And if he had pictures of them, he sent them to him. He sent me a packet of pictures about 10 years before I retired. And these pictures were among the pictures he sent me. So in 1984, I worked at the fiber optic showcase on behalf of AT&T, demonstrating how bonded splicing worked. In 1985, I worked at the fiber optic showcase also. In that case, I was demonstrating how testing equipment worked and maintenance and troubleshooting procedures. And then in 1986, I went back to the 1986 showcase to demonstrate a fiber optic splicing lab that I had designed and built myself for $5,000. These are what you're going to see in the slides. And the reason I'm even saying all that is it was in 1986 that the splicing lab I was demonstrating here at the 1986 fiber optic showcase was the lab we were working in when we were splicing the 1986 cable. So there is some context there. So anyway, let's look at the slides. And this is the only color picture. The rest of them are all black and white. But here, if I zoom in, we can see it. There we are, the Illinois Bell Fiber Optic Showcase 1984. And you can see all the equipment that they're showing and tractors. And this is the area where they were demonstrating how to plow cable and stuff. Anyway, here's a black and white aerial view of the Fiber Optic Showcase in 1984. Again, there it is, 1984. And yeah, we can see trenchers and tents set up with vendors' equipment. There's an area where they're demonstrating Pelsu tents, my favorite tents of all time. Areas where they're demonstrating placing cables and stuff. Anyway, it was kind of a big deal back then. That was the 1984 showcase, and here I am representing AT&T, even though I was working for Illinois Bell at the time, demonstrating to one of Illinois Bell's vice presidents how the bonded method of splicing works. And one of the things I would note in this picture is if we focus in on, notice the round black circles here and see what looks like drawn figure eights on those circles. When you're gluing fibers together, you have to glue the fibers into plastic termini, cleave them at a right angle, and then polish the cleaved glass on jeweler's sandpaper. 2 different grits, a coarse one, then a fine one, and you do polishing in figure eights. And what you see there are figure eights that have been, where the fibers have been polished. You can tell they've been polished. Once the sandpaper gets used up, you toss it and get new ones. But that's just something I remember. I remember being taught the figure eight method for doing your fiber end polishing. You would polish the ends and then place them in a machine that would align them so that you could then glue them together. That's how the bonded method worked. Here's a bit more of a close-up of it. Look at that young man there. Holy shit. All right. And again, some more 1984 pictures of me in my cowboy hat provided to me by AT&T. They were using a Western motif for their display, obviously. Now we go to 1985, from 1984 to 1985. This is the only picture of me from 1985 that I got in the packet. But there I am posing as if I'm operating a test instrument. I actually remember the name of that instrument. That's a Standtel OTDR. So I was there demonstrating how that worked and how you would use it to test fibers and troubleshoot fibers and things like that. Then we go to 1986. Now, here I am in 1986 with my buddy Tom Miller, came along with me, and we are demonstrating the fiber optic splicing trailer that I designed and built in 1986 at the behest of our area manager. The goal here was to demonstrate that as opposed to buying a $35,000 fiber optic splicing lab, you could spend $5,000 and assemble a splicing lab. All you needed was a vehicle to tow it, which of course we all had splicing vehicles. I had one, he had one. Any cable splicer had a splicing vehicle. So if you had a splicing vehicle, you could hitch up to this trailer and tow it out the job site and use that as your fiber optic splicing lab. It costs $5,000 versus $35,000 for a drive-it-yourself lab. That was the whole goal of the little project that we put together, but the design and building of this trailer was all done by me in April and May of 1986. Anyway, There's me and Tom again, faking like we're looking at blueprints or something. Here you see the inside. So this trailer was empty when we picked it out for our project. It was completely empty, so everything you see in here was assembled and built by me. I went to the local building supply stores to pick all the cabinets out that we installed, and the paneling and crap, the shelving. I decided where it would all go so it would be efficient for us to work. Here you see an example of a 1986 vintage fusion splicing machine that we were using. These were brand new to us at the time. We were just starting to deploy the fusion method for doing the splices. And there's some more views of that. Here's another view of it. Here you see me holding a hot air gun and doing the shrink tubing on a fiber splice. Here you can see exactly how it was done in 1986. We pulled the cables into the rear of the trailer, placed them in the closure similar to the one that I'm going to take apart today, and stripped the cables down to the bare fibers, mounted the fibers in splicing trays, then routed the fibers down to the fusion machine where they were stripped and cleaved and placed in this awesome little fusion machine here, which was capable of aligning the fibers to within a micron, and then strike an arc to literally fuse them together. The shrink tubing was put on top to just protect the splice after it was done, and then all the fiber would be wound back into the trays and the splices would be stored. And that's literally how it was done. There's another picture of me and Tom at the showcase. There's another picture, again, showing a nice angle of how the splice was up on a shelf, out of the way, so we had room for the fusion machine. Here you see the lid system that we used to align the fibers. There's another picture of us at the trailer. And that's pretty much it. So in 1986 then, Tom and I, on January 27th, the day after the Bears won the Super Bowl, on January 26th in 1986, Tom and I were on Knoxville Avenue in Peoria, Illinois, in a manhole, building a splice that eventually wound up back in my hands. Now, how did that happen? Okay, well, we have to go further in my career to explain that, but let me do that now. Bring me back here. So, yeah, I built that splice in 1986 on a cable that was placed in 1986. You fast forward 15 years, and now I am in engineering. I am now a fiber optic engineer. Planning engineer to be specific, but the planners in Illinois Bell did fiber optic engineering. So I'm now engineering the jobs that I used to work on. So in about the year 2003, I think, 2004, we had reached the point where the cable that I worked on in 1986, that I showed you the splice from, had become obsolete and was no longer needed. We had placed a new cable around the area that cable used to run to. It was a larger cable, and it was placed in such a manner that if it were to get cut, there would be no service interruptions. It was placed as part of a ring. The original old cable I worked on in 1986 was not part of any ring, so it was deemed to be obsolete. And in about 2003 or 2004, as a planning engineer, I put out a job to construction to go out to the field and do what we call wreck the cable. Wrecking the cable basically means you go to where all the splices were at and cut the splices in two, or cut the cables in two, cut the splices out, and then use winches and line trucks to pull the cables out of the underground conduits that they're in to free the space for future new cables. So anyway, in 2004, 2003, somewhere around there, I put a job out to go wreck the cable that I'd worked on in 1986. But when I passed that job along to construction, I passed along with a note to the foreman that I wanted the crew to pick a random splice when they were cutting the splices out, pick one at random and send it to me. I wanted to keep it because that was a cable I had worked on. So I wanted to keep one of the splices. Now, by just sheer random luck, the one splice they cut in two and decided to send to me happened to be the one that Tom and I had built the day after the Bears won the Super Bowl. And I will talk about that when I disassemble the splice for you, which I'm going to do now, because I'm pretty much done setting up the background and context for what the thing is, why I built it, and why I now have it in my possession. So, let's just go to the video where I disassemble it and show you what's inside. Hello everybody, and welcome to Double G Studios and Workshop. Today we are going to do something quite different. As I have just previously explained, there was a fiber optic splice I built 40 years ago to the day today. Today is January 27th, 2026. This fiber optic splice right here was built on January 27th, 1986. In the very, very early days of fiber optics. This was one of the very first cables placed across the state of Illinois in 1986. And January 27th, 1986, of course, was the day after the Bears won the 1985-1986 Super Bowl, which they achieved that on January 26th, which, as you can see, has been celebrated here on this splice that I assisted in building in 1986 along with Tom Miller. So this splice was built by Tom Miller and Glenn Gould on January 27th, 1986, the day after the Bears won the Super Bowl. And looking at the side here, we can see that the score was 46-10. Chicago Bears over the New England Patriots. Apparently, I was very excited about that the day after, and I celebrated it by notating it on this splice that I thought no one would ever see again. Generally, once a communication splice is made, particularly a straight splice, as this one is, that'll be the last time anyone ever sees what's on the inside of it. But as I have explained previously, this splice was recovered from the field after the cable was disabled and cut dead, and it was returned to me for me to keep per my request. Little did I know that 40 years would go by and I would have a YouTube channel and would plan on disassembling this thing 40 years later. Was really hoping to disassemble this in association with the Bears going to the Super Bowl again. That would have been really cool. But they came pretty close. So I'm going to go ahead and proceed with this project 40 years to the day after it was built. What I'm going to be doing is I'm going to be removing the cover and seeing what is inside, which I already know what is inside, but who knows, maybe I left more messages inside or something. But even if I left nothing, we'll take a look at what is inside, and I'll talk about the technology that was used back then to create fiber splices. So, here we go. Oh, I will talk a little bit about how this was assembled so that it would last. Well, I think the projected lifetime of these was supposed to be 25 years, but realistically they were hoping to get 40 years or more out of these. So it's all cast aluminum, and then there's a gasket that sits all around the thing. There's the central splice chamber, and then there's the areas where you either seal the cables or seal the end. Most fiber splices, if not 99% of them, are usually done in a butt splice style, meaning all the cables are brought in from one end so they can be joined, and then the splice can then be taken out of the splicing lab and placed in the manhole or placed in the buried pit or wherever it is it needs to be placed. That's kind of the general process here. Seal the cables, open them up, splice the fibers, put them in trays, seal it back up. Let's take it apart. First I'm going to loosen the bolts. There was also a silicone sealant that was rubbed all over the gaskets on both sides, and this was all bolted together. There was also, I don't know if I mentioned it before, but there was also, this was actually the inner splice case of the splice. There was an outer splice case that went over the top of this. In some environments that the inside of the splice would then be flooded with encapsulant to provide further protection, or there were some cases where the inside was just aired up with 5 to 10 pounds of nitrogen and left under air pressure. But yeah, there was another splice case over the top of this one, which would explain why after 40 years we can still read the writing that was written 40 years ago. And actually that was with a Sharpie. Sharpies did exist 40 years ago. That was written with a Sharpie. So kudos to Sharpie. Your ink lasted 40 years. Where did I leave off at? There we go. Okay, there's no need to loosen these bolts because I really have no interest in seeing what's under here. Really what's under here is just simply these cables inside grommets, and that were then opened up inside the chamber. Anyway, let's proceed. Alright, as expected, it is still on there very, very tight. Let's try a persuader. There we go. And there we go. Off it comes. What is underneath? And there it is. Now we can see what is inside here that has been in there for 40 years. Here we can see some of this silicone sealant that was placed in there on the grommet. And I can also see a desiccant pack that was placed in the bottom. I guess that was standard practice back then too. Here we also see some foam blocks that were inserted to help cushion these splice trays. Let me get this out of the way and talk about these splice trays. So this particular cable trying to determine how many fiber splices we have in here. Let's have a look. There is none in the top tray. Here's the top tray. Let's go ahead and open that up so you can have a look at that, see what the tray looks like when it's empty. Apparently we didn't have anything to put in the top tray. Top tray is empty. Let's look at the next one. These were designed to pop off like that. So in here we have 4 splices. We can see them. Let me, I could use some kind of a small tool here. I'll just go ahead and use the screwdriver. But here we can see these are fusion splices, which I expected that they would be. In 1986, fusion splices were relatively new to splicing technology for fibers. When fibers were first developed, they were spliced together with mechanical splicing connectors. I have an example. So in 1984, when I was first trained on fiber optics, we were taught how to glue glass fibers into the end of plastic termini, cleave off the fiber at the end, polish those termini on jeweler's sandpaper. You would do that for each end, and then you would insert each termini into a device similar to this, or there were other similar ways of doing this, where you would put this in one clamping device, put this in another clamping device. You'd have a machine that could adjust these in micron increments. You would line up the center of the fibers from each end, and you would then lay a drop of ultraviolet glue in the gap in between the two termini that would then set with ultraviolet light, and then you'd have a clamp that would hold it all together. These were called tunable splices. This particular example, this is known as a rotary splice. One of the reasons I wasn't quite sure what I would find inside this splice was in 1986 we were doing field trials of these connectors, the rotary splice connectors. These were developed by AT&T to take the place of their bonding method that they had developed in 1984. In 1986 we were field trialing this, and I remember that we were field trialing this on this particular cable that was placed. So I wasn't sure whether we would find a fusion splice inside here or find one of these bonded splices. These were also known as tunable splices, in that's why they were called rotary splices. When you got these all lined up best you could, you would send your partner back to the central office, and your partner would throw a laser light on the fiber from the central office. Out in the field, you would literally hand tune these. You would clamp the other end into a sensor, and then with the laser light flowing through, you would literally twist or rotate these splices while you looked at a meter, and whenever you got that meter to peak, that's when you would stop rotating, and that's when you would hit it with the fiber optic light, or with the ultraviolet light to set the glue, and then you would store the splice into the splice tray. So I wasn't sure if I was going to find rotary splices in this tray or fusion splices. We did find fusion splices. So here's what a fusion splice looks like when it's been completed in the field. You can see, barely, but you can see how you got your fiber coming into each end here. 2, 3. Looks like we have a broken one. So this one, or no, we don't. What is that? Is that a spare? No, it's broken. There it is. Broke right there. I don't know if I broke that when I took this apart just now, or maybe that was broken after they wrecked it out of the field and tossed it around in their truck and stuff. This thing did take quite a journey to get from the field to my desk, but something must have jostled in here enough to break one of these fibers, which is something that we were prepared to repair back then if this were to happen. That's a repair that we could make. But anyway, here you can see the splices, and you'll note the storage of the extra fiber, the slack loop, bearing in mind that when the fibers were exposed out of the cables, we would expose 4 feet of it. And the reason we would expose so much of it is in the early days of splicing fiber, it was very difficult to obtain a perfect splice. You would sometimes have to attempt 2 or 3, maybe 4 or 5 times. You would try to resplice until you got the lowest loss splice you could get. So having a lot of extra fiber was a necessity in the early days of splicing. We would usually start with 4 feet, and by the time we got proficient at it, we were nailing these fusion splices every time. But in the early days, we struggled with the different splicing methods and getting everything to as low a loss as possible. So that's why there was always a lot of extra fiber slack to be stored after a splice was made. And that's what the trays were designed to do, was to store the fiber slack in a way that would allow them to not have any micro bends in them. So there are 4 splices on this tray, and I expect we'll find 4 splices on the tray below. Let's have a look. Yes, and there's, so in this case, we actually have some paper tape that was laid over them, and they're actually numbered 1, 2, 3, and 4. Not sure why we didn't do that on this tray, but maybe because I assume we probably knew that if these were 1, 2, 3, and 4, these would have to be 4, 5, or 5, 6, 7, and 8. Which tells me, which I already knew actually, but it tells us that this was an 8-fiber cable. An 8-fiber cable sounds very, very small, and it is by today's standards. But in 1986, when fiber optic cables were extremely expensive, any amount you could say per foot was a lot of money saved. So back in the early days of fiber optics, they would really engineer them to try to use as few fibers as possible in the field. At the time this cable was placed, they determined 8 fibers would be sufficient to last for 20 years, which it actually was. The only thing that made this cable obsolete was it was replaced with a larger, newer cable about 15 years later on a different route that was more, that was less susceptible to damages. So this particular cable really was only in service for maybe about 16, 17 years before it was taken out of service, which is not very long for an across the state cable, at least by last century standards. By today's standards, I suppose maybe it might be kind of more normal. I do know that, like I said, the 8-fiber cables were not an uncommon size back in 1986. There was lots of 8s. There were some 4-fiber cables. We placed a 4-fiber cable to the Quad Cities in 1986. But there were also 12s. Probably in 1986, maybe the largest fiber cable commercially available might have been 60 or 72, possibly 84. 40 years ago, memory's a little dim. Nowadays, of course, I've been out of the field for 5 years now, but at the time I left, they were up to more than 1,000 fiber cables that they were placing. That, believe it or not, were a whole lot bigger than what the size of this cable is. So this cable held 8 fibers. They now put like 1,000 fibers into a cable about this size and still fit them into about the same size splice case with about the same size splice trays. Pretty impressive, actually. But anyway, so that's how we did this in 1986. We, if I take rotate this bottom tray up, we can see some more stuff here. Notice that here's the desiccant pack that was placed 40 years ago. And look at this. There are copper pairs in this cable. So this cable is a composite cable. It has both copper pairs and fiber optic pairs. Why are the copper pairs in here? Well, in 1986, remember, this is 1986 we're talking about. 1986, we did not have cell phones yet, folks, believe it or not. I mean, there were some, but they were very, very expensive, huge, and only in the very, very major cities. For the rest of the country, we realistically did not have cell phones, and it would probably be at least a few years before they would really start to come out and take hold, up into the early 90s. So in 1986, we did not have cell phones. And fiber optic cables were, of course, in 1986, used for long-distance jobs. They were placed across the state, across the city, to cover long distances. So, in order to make the construction of these projects easier and to help with future maintenance concerns, these copper pairs are here for communications. They're here to talk on. And that's what this particular little device is. This is a load coil. So this load coil would have been placed in one of these splices every, roughly 3,500 feet, maybe 4,000 feet, maybe 6,000 feet. I think it depends on the gauge, but this appears to be 24 gauge, so I'm going to guess probably 4,000 to 6,000 feet is about where these load coils were placed, with the intent in mind of being able to carry voice communication circuit as long as 20 miles, if not further. I think our regens in 1986 were maybe 20 miles apart, 30, 40. They were pretty far apart. So without any regeneration available on a long span, if you wanted to talk to your partner back at the central office to send you light, you would clip onto one of these wire pairs with a battery and a headset, and you would signal him in the office, and then you guys could talk, and that was done over these copper pairs. As cell phone technology improved to the point where it became ubiquitous, they stopped putting copper pairs inside the fiber optic cables. But still, it was interesting to see that. I'd kind of forgotten about that. So it was interesting to uncover that. Yes, in 1986, if we wanted to talk to our partner in the central office, we needed to have copper pairs inside the fiber cable that we were working on so that we could talk to our partner in the office. Anyhow, so that explains your copper pairs. Here, these are just simply copper wire connectors of the type that we used back then. These are called Scotch locks, made by 3M. 3M made a similar product for fiber many years later called fiber locks, which operated the same way. You put two fibers in and squeeze it, and boom, you've got them spliced. But that's another story for another day. So, looking at the cable, what we can tell by looking at the cable is that there are 1, 2, 3, 4 tubes. So there are 4 tubes inside this cable. Each one of those tubes held 2 fibers. So there were 2 fibers per tube, and when we put them in the splice, we would take 2 tubes and route them to one tray, and 2 tubes and route them to the other tray, and that's how we would carry the 4 fibers into each tray for the purposes of making the splices. The splices themselves, of course, were done with high precision fusion machines, which I've shown you pictures of what those look like. So there you have it. I didn't find any interesting notes or pictures or anything on the inside, which I was known for leaving back then. So I didn't leave anything interesting inside. Apparently I just wrote on the outside of it. But there, after 40 years, the splice has been reopened, re-inspected, and we've examined how it was built and talked about why things were built the way they were back then. So that's it. Actually, I'm going to put this back together and put it back up on my shelf. So that's it for today from Double G Studios and Workshop. Ta-la!